computer. I think that should be recording. All right. So thank you everyone today for joining us. It's a short, I like to keep this a brief lunchtime presentation. So I always like to, couple of Zoom housekeeping. Generally, I request you turn your video off just for bandwidth purposes and also because I record it. I feel, you don't want your face on my recording, but that's also your choice. You can feel free to put any questions into the chat. We're also not a huge group, so we can also raise your hand, ask verbally. And the whole point of this is to have a conversation and to answer questions. So really don't feel shy throughout. Now you might wonder, or I'd like to always introduce people to who I am and what my job is at McGill. My formal title is something called Coordinator of Scholarly Communications. I work at McGill Library. I find people don't often know what that means. So you can think of me as sort of the point person on campus related to open access, scholarly publishing. I'm in charge of McGill's Open Repository e-scholarship. I'm sort of the point person or one of the people on campus that is supposed to really understand all of the trends happening in scholarly publishing, the changes, what's going on. That's sort of, you can think of me like that. You're sort of scholarly publishing expert, if you will. So in terms of the kinds of things we're going to be going through today, at the end of the webinar, I hope you'll be able to understand or articulate the open access requirements in Canada and Quebec with their major funding agencies. We're going to talk about the two primary ways to make your work open access, and then we're going to talk about what some of the library services are in that area. So everyone loves a good definition. So this is sort of a common one that gets trotted out, but open access is digital, online, free of charge, and free of most copyright and licensing restrictions. Peter Suber is a faculty member at Harvard. Most people focus on the first half of that sentence, so online and free of charge. Copyright and licensing does play into it as well, but we'll focus mostly on that first half of the definition for today also. So the Tri-Agency Open Access Policy, this is the one that applies to SSHRC, NSERC, and CIHR. So the policy is that if you have gotten a grant from one of these funding agencies, a research grant, so it doesn't apply to student grants, for example, but any peer-reviewed journal publications must be freely accessible online within 12 months. So it doesn't apply to books or book chapters, but specifically to peer-reviewed journal publications. What can be made available online is something either called the accepted manuscript or the publisher version. We're going to revisit those terms and concepts a little bit later, but I'll just plant that seed here now. And it applies to grants awarded after May 1st, 2015, although CIHR actually goes back to 2008. FRQ, the Fonds de Recherche du Québec, also has an open access policy, and it pretty much mirrors the Tri-Agency. So peer-reviewed journal publications, freely accessible online within 12 months. It happened a little bit later, so it's for grants awarded after April 1st, 2019. The only major difference between FRQ and the Tri-Agency is that it actually does apply to student grants. So for those of you who are maybe FRQ grant holders that are students, or perhaps you supervise someone who is an FRQ grant holder, that's just something to note about this particular policy. Any questions about the grants and the grant policies before I go more in depth? I shall continue. So there are two main ways to make your work open access. Oh, I just see a thing popped into the chat. Oh, no. Can you remind us the dates after which they apply? Yeah, so for FRQ, it's April 1st, 2019 was the date. So if you got the grant, it's the date of the grant awarding. You can think of it that way. So if the grant was awarded for FRQ after April 1st, 2019, it applies to you. And for SSHRC and NSERC, if you were awarded those grants after, I think I just had it was May 1st, 2015, it applies to you, although CIHR goes back till 2008. So those are the dates. But yeah, it's the date of the awarding of the grant. And yes, I will provide the slides at the end of the session. Also, because I'm recording it, I'll send along the video as well. So there's two primary ways to make your work open access. And I'll kind of we'll talk about both of them. So one, published in an open access journal, or you could publish in what we would call a closed journal, but make a copy open via an open repository like McGill's eScholarship. I'm going to delve both into each of those options in more detail. So in the open access landscape, we give these options color names. So gold open access is often the one that people are more familiar with. That the journal content is entire contents are 100% open. It is an open access journal. So, PLOS is an example, PeerJ, BMC, Glossa. I'm sure you've seen open access journals in your discipline. And when these policies came out, a lot of people thought, okay, I have to publish in an open access journal, which is one option. But there is another one that I'll discuss. But this is often the most common thing people think of. So the way this works, of course, if you go to the website of the journal, you click the PDF, you get the PDF, and it doesn't matter if you're at McGill, if you're not affiliated with an institution, there's no subscription. So anyone, anywhere in the world can access that article for free. Now there is, if you're wondering how do I find open access journals in my area, if you're not familiar, you've heard of some, but you're not sure of them, there is a directory of open access journals called the DOAJ. Like anything, I always recommend you review the journal's website for the editorial board, its scope, its policies. The DOAJ does do vetting before it allows journals to be in this index, but as anywhere, the journals will vary in quality. So I still recommend you do your own formal assessment of the website. Oh yeah, don't worry, Lisa, we're gonna talk about that some journals, yes, will ask you to pay extra. Here we are. So yes, of course, this doesn't come without, it's not a free ride in most cases. Unfortunately, most of these journals do charge, as Lisa mentions, what's called an article processing charge or an APC. I put up some examples just so you can get a sense of the variety and the range that these charges are. I think Nature is something like $10,000. If you're wondering why they vary so widely, and I should also say there are some journals that don't charge fees to make their work open access. We call these platinum journals. They're more common in the humanities and social sciences. So for example, in my field of library and information studies, there are a lot of open access journals that do not charge fees. That's not as common or is very rare in, say, the medical sciences and in some other fields. But I did want to mention that those kinds of journals do exist depending on your discipline. Now you might wonder, why are the fees so different? Why is Nature 10,000 and PLOS is 2,000 or what have you? There's not actually a really great answer. There's, to some extent, they believe it's based on what we call what the market can bear. So that is fields that have more money, i.e., for example, medicine, have bigger grants, tend to have larger fees than, say, humanities and social sciences. I think Gloss is a really good example, like the linguistics journal. I'll send the slides around afterwards, but I included a couple citations to some interesting papers if you wanted to read more about, why APCs vary quite a bit. So now McGill does have some article processing charge discounts. You can see, once again, they vary based on the publisher and how big they are. We usually, there's the link. We usually negotiate them during our licensing agreement. So say we pay to access Cambridge content, and then they'll give us a 20% discount on the APCs, for example. So I put the list up, and that list regularly gets updated as we either get new ones or occasionally we discontinue ones. But so these are the discounts we have available via the library. Now, beyond these discounts, there's some new ones that we're just launching or have just been negotiated this past year. So for example, with SAGE, as of this past January, if you're a corresponding author with a SAGE Choice journal, which is, SAGE Choice just means they're closed journals, you have the option to make your work open at no cost. So this is part of a licensing agreement. There are some exceptions. I think there's only about 9 journals, though, that are an exception to this. But so you can make, if you publish with a closed SAGE journal, you can elect to make it open for free. Or if you publish with one of SAGE's open access journals, there's a 40% discount. Now, as I mentioned, this nice discount applies, or this free waiver, I guess you could consider, is only with their closed journals. It's an opt-in system though. That's the only problem. So Sage will send you an email saying you're eligible for this. And I've noticed some professors think it's spam or they think they're asking to pay. But so it's an opt-in system. It won't happen automatically. You have to like select and say yes to it. Anyway, but this is a nice, I know Sage covers a wide range of journals and disciplines. So this is one of our benchmark ones, I guess, that we have. In addition to the Sage agreement, we have one with the Company of Biologists. So it's for 3 journals: Development, Journal of Cell Science, and the Journal of Experimental Biology. It's the same thing. If you publish in one of those 3 as the corresponding author, you can elect to make your work open. Once again, it is an opt-in system. You get sent an email and then you say, yes, I would like to participate. And then there's one that'll be starting in January 2022. So starting then, once again, corresponding authors publishing with CIHR will also have the option to make their work open access. Their exceptions are just their Compass journals and their partner publications. So this is a new announcement. I haven't announced it yet because it doesn't start technically until January, but hot off the press. And I know that applies to a lot of medicine and medical area researchers. Are there questions about any of those agreements, APCs, those discounts, etc.? So we may see more of those in the future. That seems to be, I've been doing this job for 5 years. It seems to be the trajectory a lot of libraries are on, is negotiating these kinds of agreements. So we'll see if there's more of them in the future. So that's the gold route. So that's publishing in a full open access journal. So the other route is something we call green, or the self-archiving route. And someone's asked if I could send a list of the Sage journals that are included in the agreement. They don't unfortunately provide a list. They just say, but I can, like, what I can do is try to point to where on their website that is. Yeah, I'm going to make a note right now. Sage journal list. And if you ever have any questions, so if you're publishing with Sage and you're not sure if the journal meets it, you can also email me. I mean, I have a job. I'm here to help support everyone on campus in these areas. So you can always write me and say, I'm not sure if this counts, Jessica. I'm happy to look into it and confirm. So the second route is self-archiving, or the green route. And what this means is that you can post a copy of your paper in an open repository. And, I'm going to put some example journals up. But to be honest, most journals allow you to do this. It's sort of this hidden secret in the world of publishing. So the way that this would look is, say you had published in pharmacoepidemiology and drug safety. This is your paper. Usually, if I wasn't at McGill, if I tried to access this PDF, I'd be asked to pay, whatever, $10 for 48-hour access, for example. However, there is an open copy of this paper in McGill's Open Repository eScholarship. And so if I click this download PDF, I could get this PDF for free on eScholarship. And so that's the green route. So although on the website of the journal it's closed and it looks like you have to pay, there is an open copy in existence. Now, one of the major questions people ask is, well, doesn't this violate copyright? No, interestingly enough. But there are exceptions. So this only applies to certain versions of your manuscript, which I'll talk about in just a second. Sometimes there is a delay. So sometimes they say, yes, you can post to an open repository, but not for 6 months, 12 months, 24 months, etc. And this is where it's really important to know what that length of time is if you have a grant. If you remember, FRQ and the tri-agency require it to be open within 12 months. So if there is a delay, you want to make sure it's 12 months or less. I have seen some that are 24 months, 36 months, etc. So you always want to look at your publishing agreement to know if this is allowable. In terms of the versions, so there's you can think of your paper as having 3 versions to it. The preprint is what you initially submit to the journal. So that's your very first, I guess, draft is what you submit. Then it goes through peer review. You make lots of changes. Finally, it gets accepted, and that is your accepted manuscript. So it's been accepted for publication, but it hasn't gone through what we call production. It hasn't gone through typesetting, layout, the prettiness. But so those are sort of the 3 versions of your paper. And of those 3, the ones that you're going to have the most rights for are the preprint and the accepted manuscript. Typically, you will very rarely have any rights to the final publisher PDF, but you will have usually rights for the first 2. So let's dig a little bit more into the accepted manuscript. So I don't know if you remember at the beginning, I mentioned that for the tri-agency or FRQ, that it could be either the accepted manuscript or the final publisher PDF could be made open. And so this is what I'm talking about. If you posted a copy of your accepted manuscript to an open repository in less than 12 months, that would meet SSHRC and NSERC's criteria, etc. So the accepted manuscript, though, of course, there's a catch. You have to save it. Typically, the publishers aren't going to email it to you or tell you about, well, they might, they won't tell you. You have to kind of dig around. They'll tell you about how you can pay for open access first. But so you have to, remember to save this copy. I call it act on acceptance. So the minute you're accepted, save that version of your manuscript and label it, accepted manuscript, because that's usually what you're going to be allowed to post to repositories. And as you can imagine, it's more or less the same version, like it's the same as your final copy. It just hasn't gone through layout, production, etc. Now, often I get a lot of questions about the accepted manuscript. So some people ask if this is the proof. It's not the proof, because the proof, unfortunately, has been typeset, right? It has gone through production. So it's the version prior to that stage. It may be a Word doc. You can often find it in the publisher's system. So as I said, they're not going to probably email it to you separately, but if you go into the publisher's system, you can often locate it. There is an online guide that I've linked to here that shows, there's usually 3 or 4 main publisher systems that are used, like same software. So it shows you how to kind of go in and see if you can locate it. Yeah. Are there questions or additional questions people have about the accepted manuscript? You can take anything away from my presentation, it's knowing this, because this is free. This is a really free way and relatively simple way to make your work open. It paused already. I've got a raised hand, go ahead. You've got my name, Jessica Lang, but I assume, anyway, you can go ahead and ask your question.
Yes, thank you. Can I speak French?
On peut essayer, oui.
OK. Dans le fond, une fois qu'on a gardé le manuscrit qui a été accepté, malheureusement, je suis arrivée un peu en retard. Donc, qu'est-ce qu'on peut faire avec ce manuscrit?
Oui, OK, parfait. Parce que tu peux... maintenant, c'est le slide, on peut...
Vous pouvez répondre en anglais.
Je comprends, mais c'est difficile de parler en français avec le mot de dépôt institutionnel. Je comprends. Okay, so the question was, I've got my accepted manuscript, but now what do I do? I think that I reflected the question properly.
Yes. Exactly.
So what you can do now is you want to now put it into an open repository. So an example of one is McGill's eScholarship. So you can see here I've shown there's an online deposit form we have. So you basically just sign in, fill the form out. So you say, the title of your paper, the authors, and then you attach the PDF and you send it to us and we put it up. That's pretty much it. So McGill, the eScholarship is the McGill solution to this. So the repository is open to anyone, anywhere in the world. Anyone can search McGill eScholarship. It doesn't, if you're in Japan or Australia or wherever. As I mentioned, it meets tri-agency and FRQ requirements. And it's also indexed in Google and Google Scholar. So for example, I've searched my paper and it's come up. Like in Google, it's been the eScholarship version of my paper has come up as some of the first hits in Google. Google Scholar is a little bit different only because Google Scholar has something called versions. So, it'll show the paper and then there'll be a little link that says see all versions. And then often eScholarship's, one of the versions. And that's only because the top level link is usually the one that gets referred to the most, which tends to unfortunately be the publisher PDF. But just so you do know, we are indexed in Google Scholar as well. So yeah, in terms of getting into eScholarship, yeah, you just fill out our form, attach it, and you can attach multiple files if you have several papers, for example. We'll double check the copyright. So we'll double check the publisher policies before we upload it. And then we just upload it. So we put it up and then we email you the link for where it can be found. Any questions about, great, about eScholarship? So other things we do, so of course we will deposit these materials for you, but there's sort of other things we can look at doing for you. Oh yeah, and someone asked a great question. Can we send materials to eScholarship that was accepted 1 or 2 years ago? Yes, definitely. We'll take things from whenever. And actually what we also recommend people doing is, say you discover that there's a 12-month embargo. You can't put your paper, make it open for 12 months. Send it to us right away. We have a system where we can lock it, and we can just in our system say, release this in 12 months. So you don't have to worry about remembering in a year or two to send it to us. I mean, if you do, that is totally fine, but we know that takes a burden off the researcher. If the minute they're accepted, they send it to us and we handle any embargoes. But yeah, so we'll do what's called an open access review. So if you send us your list of publications, we'll let you know which versions can be made open. So we've had some publishers deposit, one of them was over 100 accepted manuscripts. Like we went back through his entire CV. He found his accepted manuscripts going back to whatever year it was, and then we put them all up. So definitely it can be what we call kind of retroactive deposits. But yeah, so that's one of the services. So if you're not sure which version you can make open or if the journal allows it, we will look through, do what we call a review of your publication list. We'll also can do a journal policy analysis. So say, there tends to be 10 journals that those are the journals in your field. Those are the journals everyone's always publishing in. What are the policies for those 10 journals? And do they meet with grant compliance, for example? That's something else we'll do. I've got someone joining me from the Faculty of Management. I did that for them at one point. They had, 40 journals that they, that were, they wanted to know, do these 40 journals allow open access, and does that meet, the grant agency criteria? And so I went through and actually in that case, 85% of them did. There was a big fear that they wouldn't. And then, 85% of them allowed people to deposit, as I mentioned, this green route within 12 months. So that's another thing we can do. Yeah, and as I said, we'll take care of looking at the copyright permissions and handling any embargoes or delays. So if you have any questions or if you want to follow up on any of these services, you can either email me or we have a service account, eScholarship. And I'll also say the other thing, we do, I'm happy to talk about this anywhere. So I've gone into, departmental meetings, I've gone into graduate seminars. If you want to talk like this or talk that's similar to this, I'm very happy to go and present pretty much anywhere on campus on these topics. So I'm very happy to do something like this or a version of this in a seminar, faculty council, etc. A couple commonly asked questions related to this. So some people wonder, well, I post everything to ResearchGate. Is that an open access repository? And the answer is no. And that's because it's what we call a closed system. So you need to have a login in order to access ResearchGate. So that doesn't make it open. There's also no preservation mechanisms. So, hopefully, McGill Library has been around for probably over 100 years. I should know the exact date. I think we go back to 1821, but we've been around for a very long time, whereas ResearchGate could fold tomorrow, for example, when your papers are no longer there. It's also, in case you're curious, most copyright agreements don't permit posting to ResearchGate. They consider it commercial, and so that's often not allowed, even the accepted manuscript in the copyright agreements. This is also the same with your personal website. So posting to your personal website doesn't meet grant agency open access requirements, also for the same reasons for preservation purposes. That's not to say you don't post to your personal website, just if you're doing it to meet open access requirements, that wouldn't meet them. Now, in terms of, I talk about eScholarship and I always sell eScholarship because that's what I run and that's what McGill has, but there are other repositories out there that might be of interest, particularly ones that are sort of in your subject areas. So these can be great for connecting with other people in your discipline. There's also the preprint repository, so places where you can put your preprint up. So that initial submission, we see that becoming more common nowadays. And actually, this is often permitted to post your preprint. It doesn't count as prior publication. You just always want to check with your journal, but a lot of publishers allow this. So some examples of these subject or disciplinary repositories. And so I just put up kind of this table, and some of them might be familiar to you, some of them might not. So arXiv, for example, is one that's very common and well used in physics, math, computer science. There's other ones that have been launched more recently, like medRxiv is one that's very popular now in the health sciences. And there's some other ones there as well. Now, the only thing I do note is that some of them only allow you to put preprints. They're really meant to just be a preprint server. That is a place to post your, that initial submission, get it out there, get the research rapidly disseminated. This is why it took off so much during COVID, particularly medRxiv. Unfortunately, some of them don't allow you to update it with your accepted manuscript. Once again, that doesn't matter necessarily unless you have a grant. So if you have a grant and you want to, say, use arXiv as the open repository to put your work, you can, as long as you update it with the accepted manuscript. But say you post it to bioRxiv, it wouldn't let you update with the accepted manuscript. They only accept preprints. I think I saw a raised hand. Did someone have a question? You can just unmute if you did. No? Okay. Are there any questions about, these subject or these discipline repositories? Yeah, so I just want to mention them because as much as I love eScholarship, I know for some people this avenue may make more sense, or they might be more comfortable in terms of how you deposit with, I mentioned how easy eScholarship is and that we kind of handle it. Each of these will have its own sort of deposit process. And usually in that case, the researcher has to, say, create an account and then, upload the manuscript. But usually they have instructions on each of their websites. So one question you might be asking is, so how do I know the publisher policies before I submit? So how do I know that this journal will allow me to post to an open repository within 12 months? So there's a couple resources. I'm going to open up one called Sherpa Romeo. I'm going to go live. So this is a nice kind of handy tool where you can search a journal's name. So let's say let's say this is the Quarterly Journal of Operations Research. Okay, so this is a journal published by Springer. And then you can see, once again, all the different names I gave to the version. So the publisher version, the accepted version, etc. So the publisher version, you can see here that if you want to do any kind of posting with it, there's an open access fee associated with it. You might think that's not good for me. But you can see here, okay, you can post to the author's homepage right away. It says no embargo. The accepted manuscript version. So if you published in this journal, you could post the accepted manuscript on your website immediately. They always give little conditions, which is just stuff like, you want to acknowledge the initial journal, you want to give the DOI to the final published article, etc. Now, if you wanted to post it to eScholarship, for example, it says here, institutional repository, 12 months. Great. So this, if you had a grant, this would meet the criteria. Same thing here, published source must be acknowledged. Usually we recommend people just put something in the footer of their paper that says something like, this is the accepted manuscript of, then you provide the citation. We recommend that for two reasons. A, the publishers usually require it. And B, if someone comes across your accepted manuscript, then they know how to cite it. They know to cite it as, that article. Yeah, and then you can see the submitted version, or that's another name for the preprint. And you can see here, you could post to a preprint repository right away without an embargo. And the other nice thing I find about this website is if you wanted to sort of read further up on any of these policies, they provide lots of links to the publisher, like to the publisher's policy at the bottom. So this can be a handy resource if you want to quickly check a few journals. There we go. And as I said, you can also ask me, though. You can send me a list of journals, and then I'll look, I'll look through their policies and send you back a nice little Excel spreadsheet. So you might be wondering about open data. I don't talk too much about open data. This is really sort of about the publication side of things, but I do want to mention that we do have a lot of data services available at the library. So if you are interested in looking into open data and making your data open, we have a research data services website. My colleague Elisa is our research data services. So she's sort of like me, but for data. She's sort of the point person that can answer any questions related to research data and research data management. Oops. Oh yeah, and we have a guide as well. So there's an online resource with lots of tools about writing a data management plan, organizing your data, etc. So if that's something you have an interest in, we do have resources on that. It's just a bit out of scope of what I'll talk about today. And that was sort of as I call it, the quick gamut through what I want to talk about today. But does anyone have any questions? I will put a feedback form in the chat. Let me just escape and put that in. I offer this workshop pretty much once a semester. So if you have any feedback, sorry, let me just grab that and put that in the chat. There we go. Throw that in the chat. So if everyone is willing just to take a second and fill the feedback form, yeah, just to give me input about anything that was confusing or unclear or topics you'd like to hear more about, that would be great. And then otherwise, so just let that go. This is my contact. So feel free to follow up. As I always tell people, like, McGill pays me to be a resource. So my job is to help McGill researchers in this avenue. So don't feel shy about contacting me or referring students to me. That's my job. So if there are no other questions, you can either feel free to put things in the chat or yeah, just follow up later with me and ask anything. Oh, I see a raised hand. Go ahead. You can go ahead and speak if you'd like. No? All right. If there's no other questions, I will let everyone go and I'll send the slides and the recording out. I see, sorry, just as Jessica Lang raised hand because I unfortunately gave you my personal meeting invite, but whoever has raised their hand can just take their microphone off and talk. Yeah, I see Ashkan.
Yeah, hi. I was just wondering what kind of preprints or submitted papers can we upload on ResearchGate? Because I've seen some of my colleagues like uploading my publications on ResearchGate, and I don't know how it's done or what kind of papers can we upload there.
Yeah, so usually preprints are okay. So that initial submission, usually publishers don't really usually care about preprints. So usually you can kind of do whatever you want with those. So you could upload your preprint, for example, to ResearchGate. It's those later versions of your manuscript where they get a little fussier, depending on the publisher. And usually, I mean, if you've got co-authors, they should let you know if they're uploading your paper. That's just nice common policy. But if someone's uploaded something that they're not a co-author on, you can also request them to take it down if you don't want it up.
All right, thank you.
Question. Any other questions? All right. Well, thank you, everyone, and have a great rest of the afternoon.
Bye, Jessica. Thank you.